right. Thank you for being here today. Today, as you can see, and you know why you're here, but we're going to talk about the history of the first Congregational Church here in town. And to do that, we have Owen Johnston, and we have Gail. Gail, remind me of your last name. Holt. So they are both members and are here to share with you. So, thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Well, welcome everybody. This was more than the 6 folks I was told was going to be here. So, just a quick kind of caveat backstory. There's a massive amount of history with the church on the Rotary, right? As we recently have been starting to dig into the details and some of the interesting aspects, we find some inconsistencies. Something might say, oh, such and such happened in 1857. And then 2 documents later, it said, oh, no, it was 1858. So, and I've scanned in some actual Commonwealth historical documents regarding the church. So if you see any dates that don't quite match up, there you have it. Okay, first of all, is there anybody here who's a member? I know some of the folks. I've only been here 8 years, so. Karen, yeah? Okay. Is there anybody who has at least been to the church for a service, funeral, wedding, holiday? Okay. It's almost everyone here. Excellent, excellent. All right, let's jump in. There's some of these that I scanned in. I mean, you don't have to, read everything, such as it is. This is a statement from the Massachusetts Historical Society. We are registered, and have been since 1970-something, on the National Historical Register, as well as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Historical Register. 1827 was when this all started. It was the town of Longmeadow, as most of you know. The money people, the financiers, kind of the professionals of the day lived on the West Village, which we know of as Longmeadow now. Stonemasons, the people that mined the redstone, the brownstone, and all these things, they lived here in the East Village. All of the infrastructure was on the west side, so they had to travel. They had to, walk, take horse, buggy, oxen, whatever. They had to put up with random bands of unfriendly Indians that were in the area, wild animals. After putting up with this for years, they decided, well, we're going to start our own town, basically. So 1827, they sold shares to build the original building at $10 a share. And they limited how many shares you could buy. And it was going to be whatever form of their religious activities at the time. It was a very conservative, Carrie could give me a better backstory on the type of religion that they were part of. But it was very conservative. It was also the town meeting house and things of this nature. Let's see if we go here. The original roots go back to the first Congregational Church of Springfield, and that was in the 1600s. They would also travel to Springfield as opposed to the West Village of Longmeadow for their church services. 1695, there was a family going to church in Springfield that were massacred by Indians, and I found multiple documents that make that statement. Early 1700s, first religious society was formed. Again, the difference between the East and West Village. The original meeting house, which is the sanctuary of the church, minus all the additions, cost $3,500 to build. "45 members organized in 1829. It's called the Third Religious Society of Longmeadow. The First Religious Society of Longmeadow is now continually the First Congregational Church of Longmeadow. So that was the root of that piece of it right there. And the First Baptist Church here in town, East Longmeadow, was known as the Second Religious Society. So you had these being formed and popping up, if you will. The original meeting house, 45 by 55 foot structure, And it was built in the park, what we know of now is the parking lot of St. Michael's Parish Hall up on Summit Road. It's about 700 or 800 feet up the hill. And this is where everything happened. Any meeting, government events, funerals, weddings, religious gatherings, everything happened there. This is important. You see the 3 doors? This is in the new location at some point after they moved it down. And I'll get into the actual move in a little bit. This is the original construct here. And in the early 1900s, that was changed. And that's how we ended up with one double door in the middle, and these side ones became windows.
Well, and I can't see in that picture very well. How much grade is there from like the front door? Are there steps? There are a couple steps.
Yeah, we were wondering about that and looking at that too. We think that the steps probably went all the way across, and then when they went to the one door, some of those brownstone, redstone steps were sort of truncated on the side to more appropriately accommodate the windows, and then just have what we have today is the redstone steps just to the front door.
And fairly steep, which you can't see what's happening at the bottom, but I guess those
Yeah.
are steps all the way across.
We think so.
Yeah.
Near as we can tell,
It's hard to tell.
you can tell that the stones were changed at some point, because the church was moved down in 1859, I believe. So there was some grade changes from the original structure. The original church look on the inside. This is what would be the front of the pulpit area, front of the chancel and altar area. Obviously, I'll show you when the additions started to happen. So it was literally the square, kind of rectangular room, the original sanctuary. It was moved down in 1859. There's a lot of documentation to talk about stone boats. What they did is they went to the local companies that operated the mines, the Redstone mines, and they leased oxen and these stone boats. That's how they moved. They were big, like pallets, that they would put this brownstone on, the redstone, and the oxen would haul them to wherever they had to be processed or whatever. So they leased that setup to move the church. The land was donated or acquired, not really sure, can't find any real record of that. Regardless, the land came from the Pratt family of Longmeadow. And that land included the greensward. We have a horseshoe driveway up front, right? All the lawn towards the Rotary from that driveway with the Christmas tree and Kiwanis, Rotary does their thing. That's actually ours. Caveat was, and the Pratt family put this in the deed, the church can keep the greensward as its own property as long as we allow public access in perpetuity, forever. The minute we stop allowing public access, which is not going to happen, it's supposed to revert back to the heirs of the Pratt family. It's kind of neat how they wrote an encroachment in the deed back then. See, again, 1859, 1858 is the variances, and this is from an official record statement I scanned in from the state of Massachusetts. So within a year or so of accuracy. Prior to 1911 is when those doors went from 3 doors, they reconstructed the entrance to the double doors. 1926, they started doing, raising money for the additions. What we know of is the other main part of the church, where the offices and things of that nature, all happened in between 1948 to 1953. Again, they had to raise money each step of the way to do these additions. This shows, this is post-1954, because it shows the single door, the double door, and also the fellowship hall, Christian education hall. This is neat. I know that's blurry, I tried to save as much as I could from the old photos. In 1903, when this was taken, there was a shuttle car that was housed in Suffield, Connecticut, and it would make the loop, Agawam, Springfield, West Springfield, East Longmeadow, to take people around the various towns. And it was used by a lot of the area folks to come to church here, even from other towns.
Did the church own that wagon?
No, it was a company out of Suffield, Connecticut. And that's the only reference I could find to that. I thought it was just kind of a neat reference, that early public transportation, if you will. But in the same article that those pictures came from, it talks about how people from other towns preferred to come to this church. So it's kind of neat. Another view of the sanctuary
Before the addition.
before the addition. There was an organ, and I've got some facts about the organ lineage and some more slides here. It's the organ down here. Eve Coley. Anybody here familiar with that name? She was one of
The Coolies?
Yeah.
Marion was the piano teacher.
Okay.
She said Cooley.
Cooley.
She thinks
It's spelled wrong.
this is Coley.
Cooley.
Coley.
It's supposed to be Cooley?
Cooley.
C-O-O.
Okay. And this is from, this write-up in this picture is in our fellowship hall. It's in the hallway outside of fellowship hall. If you ever want to swing by the church during, on a Sunday, obviously, or during business hours, you can see a wall that Marilyn and others have put together. These amazing old pictures. So we took snapshots of some of those for inclusion.
Looks like it must be Easter or something. Look at all the lilies.
Look at all the lilies, yeah. And the old pews, and some of the fact slides I have further on, it talks about the year that the pews were updated. They got rid of the old pews, and the pews that we have now obviously replaced them. No heat until 1833. You had to bundle up. And they bought wood stoves. Coal furnace added in 1887, and if you dare go down into the, under the sanctuary where the new current furnace is, you can see the old coal bin off to the side. And so there would have been a coal shuttle door on the outside, which we couldn't find any real point of reference looking around recently, but when you go in the basement, I wouldn't advise it, you can see where the old coal bin was. Steam heat in 1911 throughout the building. The whole building was wired in 1913, and we still see evidence of that. Some of us have been up way into the super attic area up near the belfry and those areas. You can see all the old wiring. It's not being used, but it's still there. Around 1900, I think it's the early 1900s, is when they went from the 3 doors to the 1. These facts blew my mind. Women could attend church, but they were not allowed to have a voice or a vote in church business until 1875. At that point, they started the Temperance Society, something titled like that. Their responsibility was to go around town on the Sabbath and make sure people weren't doing unnecessary chores, they weren't drinking too much, they weren't gambling, and you would be placed in a bad list or whatever with the church elders. So it was like policing of people on the Sabbath. Sounds like the Pilgrim type of things. I said they were a little conservative. Women who were called deaconesses were not allowed to serve communion. They could partake of all the services, but they were not allowed to serve communion until 1975.
Wow.
Right?
That's a good gasp.
I had to read that like 15 times. I'm like, but I found a bunch of records that bolster that. And now, typically, it's mostly women who do a large part of the operations of the church. So, interesting, interesting piece of information. Again, capital fund drives happened anytime they wanted to do anything, pretty much regularly for 150 years. And then came the big one, the big lift. Fellowship Hall, Christian education wing. Was right around $100,000. They hosted the town of East Long Meadow's first kindergarten. There was no state mandated kindergarten until a few decades ago, actually. And it was housed at Fellowship Hall upstairs in the classrooms. And I think, is it Walter? There's somebody in the church who said, oh yeah, I went to kindergarten here.
Dean.
It was Dean went to kindergarten here. Yeah. Yeah, he's interesting. And that was until 1960, obviously. And as most folks know, it's used for events by the church itself. Church folks use it for things. The town. It historically had been available for rental. I mean, there's some rules that come along with that. You know, you take care of your own garbage when you leave. Room clean when you leave. There's no smoking, no drinking, per our charter. But we're starting to get back into public use of that. So that's always something you can ask about. Construction of Fellowship Hall, 1954.
Parking lot looks like it's in the front. What is that?
That would be
That's probably just the driveway.
That'd be the driveway.
Yeah.
It's taking pictures taken from the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the front of the church. There's the doors. It's just a funny angle. Someone's standing in the driveway, I would say,
Yeah.
looking at.
A lot of changes of the landscaping and trees over the time, over time.
Brownstone Gardens. Is everybody here familiar with Brownstone Gardens?
I have an aunt that lived there.
The church partnered by using its nonprofit status to build the retirement living of East Long Meadow. It was basically for, apartments for all income elderly. In other words, they didn't discern whether or not you could afford it. You didn't have to qualify certain things. It was all incomes were allowed. Folks that couldn't stay in their own place anymore. It's not much has changed there. Now it's obviously it's run by an independent company. It's quite an impressive complex. And it used to be, got to check on this,
Yeah.
but it used to be the majority of the board of directors for Brownstone Gardens had to be church members. I don't think that that's accurate anymore.
Not anymore, no.
And I don't know, do you know when that changed?
Recently.
Yeah, it's fairly recent, last
I thought that was
5
interesting.
to 8 years, yeah.
So it's just another example of the church, working with the community to try and, do these projects. View of the balcony, back of the church, which was the original choir loft. I think we still have those original windows. I'm quite sure of that.
Those doors up there.
Those doors are original.
Yeah.
Note that in the 70s was the last time that the church had a real wholesale upgrade with, you know, lights and paint everywhere. So it's been 40, 50 years since that's been done. But it was a dark motif. Early churches are dark. It was dark woodwork, dark paint, dark. Everything was dark. I find
Except
that
the
interesting.
light allowed in, I mean.
Except for the huge
were-
windows,
Yeah.
which is kind of a neat fact. But, you know, if you go in there now and it's absolutely, you know, the opposite. (1948) saw some big changes, upgrading and updating things. (1953) was when they raised the money and whatnot. Took a year or two for them to complete Christian Education Wing, Fellowship Hall. (1976) Note the pews. Carpet, drapes, new pews. Again, a lot of these projects, actually, if you look at the details, which I didn't want to put all of them up there because it's death by PowerPoint, but the Women's Fellowship Group usually was in charge of raising the funds for these projects, these capital projects. And drapes, I don't know when the drapes left, but I'm thankful they're not there anymore. 1894, East Long Meadow said, okay, we're going to incorporate, and they did. Incorporated as a town. The church was officially named the First Congregational Church of East Long Meadow the year after. Actually, it was within a year after. And they couldn't do that until the town incorporated. So then they was able to officially do that. And the church itself is incorporated, was incorporated in May of 1911. 501c3 status, nonprofit corporation. So we've recently, due to some banking things, and trying to find the articles of incorporation, it's been interesting because there's literally no records to be found. We have an attorney who got us fixed with the state, so we're on the state registry now. But it, you know, one time.
The state doesn't have it?
They do now.
No, I mean the copy of the,
They probably do. It's a complex system.
yeah.
So the first pipe organ was installed in 26, 782 pipes, and it lasted and was used until 1996. Obviously I wasn't here then. Do you remember the old pipe organ? And could you see the pipes? Because right now, the pipes are in the back of the
No,
altar area.
they were up above where the choir sits,
Mhm.
up high up above, that's where the pipes were hidden, we didn't see them.
Same like now, the same as now. The pipes.
No, the pipe, we couldn't see the pipes before.
Oh.
They're behind those grates.
Yeah, but the ones on the side you can't, still don't see.
Yeah, we can't see them.
1996 was our newest organ, and it gets maintained every year. It's a pretty amazing organ.
There was a big capital fund drive to do that.
I remember that.
You don't have any idea what that cost back then?
I think that's when they put the lift in also. That was all one big capital fund drive.
That'd be about right. 1961, and there was some decent handwritten notes that were actually scanned into the Commonwealth's Historical Registry about the discussions to become a United Church of Christ affiliated church. And I put after much deliberation and dissent, because that's exactly what was written in some of the meeting notes. So
It was true for every congregational church, because when we joined with Evangelical Reform, they joined as a whole denomination, but because of our governance, we each had to vote whether we were going to join the denomination, every single church. And those who didn't, there's still a small denomination called Continuing Congregational Churches of those who didn't vote to belong.
Are they still called First Congregational Churches?
Depends where they are.
Interesting.
But it's not a congregational church, though, right? Is it a congregational, I'm not familiar here with United Church of Christ, so
It was a combination of denominations, so we're still congregational.
what was it prior?
Congregational Christian churches, they were called prior to that. But yes, we are still congregational in terms of the polity. That is, we make our own decisions. It's not made for us by any bishop or any outside organization.
Is it still affiliated with the United Church of Christ?
Yes.
Yeah, our charter, as is true for most congregational churches, I believe, if we do something of any magnitude, buy a piece of property, sell a piece of property,
Call a pastor.
make change, call a pastor, everything is done on a congregational vote. So it's Robert's Rules of Orders process. We issue a warrant for the meeting 2 weeks prior. We bring it up for discussion, allow discussion, vote up or down, and then we proceed with whatever the activity was that, brought before the congregation. So it's really local rule. There's no diocese, there's nobody we answer to, it's just ourselves.
It's also local ownership of land, which is not true of some denominations. The land would revert to the denomination, but not for us. We own it.
And we also pay taxes on anything that's not part of the parsonage or the church proper, sanctuary and fellowship hall, like the building on Prospect Street, we pay town property taxes on that. Because it's not direct ministerial, I forget the exact language, but it's not part of our direct ministerial mission. We just happen to own this piece of land, and even though we're a 501c3, we pay taxes on it. So it's not like, as a nonprofit church, we're not completely, erased of the tax liability in some areas. 78? Oh, yeah.
How does one, what's the criteria to get on the National Registry of Historical Places? Just have to be old,
Well, yes, that's one of them.
We all qualify.
I'm just curious to know what.
Documented, I don't know what the year cutoff is, I don't know if it's 100 years, but you have to be able to provide documentation of the age of the building. And I mean, in 2028, we can celebrate our 200th anniversary. So we definitely qualify. There's a lot of paperwork involved in that. I don't know if I have it here. But if you look, we have a newly installed nice brass type plaque on the front of the church.
Yeah, I saw it.
That says, we are part of the National Registry. Now, we're listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, that's through the Department of Interior, federal government, as well as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Historical Society. And if you ever want to see a lot of this information in its raw form, there's many documents that are on that website relevant to us. It's kind of hard to find. You have to search through some XML files and things, but it's there. So we're recognized both at the national and state level, which actually helps us in some areas. Like, we can qualify for some historic preservation money as long as it is applied to certain things, right? We can't pave our driveway with it or replace the plumbing necessarily. But there's other things we can do to the church proper using that money. We're looking into that now, actually, for window replacements. Our windows are very old. You've seen pictures of the windows. So we're in the process of getting those replaced. And this is just a picture from 1977. See the breezeway there. there's no lift. Because the lift is an outcrop, that's the little elevator that goes from the breezeway up to the sanctuary or downstairs to the classrooms. So that's missing here. I have on the table some folders with news clippings and pictures from the 60s and 70s. Thought those might be of interest for folks to peruse. I know Karen looked at some. There's a massive amount of data that we're still going through, and we want to take this presentation and expand upon it, and maybe do different types of presentations for different groups, depending on what the area of interest would be. So we're still going through mountains of information. They used to have historians. There used to be an official historian of the church. I don't know who the last one were.
You the historian of
I've been various.
Nancy Bortle was the last one.
And this is some of the stuff from her boxes that we grabbed.
Beverly and I,
Dorothy and I have been in the church since 1930s, almost 100 years of knowledge.
she also grew up right next door.
I grew up next door.
The house right next door.
I had no trouble getting to church.
No excuse.
In my choir robe, I would leap over the wall.
Okay, so here's a question.
And I can remember when it was straight across, like the children with the picture there, before it got renovated in 1948. And I can remember a minister named Ned McKinney and then Lorenzo Daw, early ministers.
Does anybody know how many ministers have been in the church since 1828? Wild guess. Wild guess. Gary's wheels are turning. More or less than 50. I have it with a tumble. It's less than 50, right? More or less than 40.
Probably close. No?
Now, I'm talking senior ministers. There was a time period, Protestant churches, there was a boom period after World War II. 50s and 60s saw everywhere. All the churches were busting at the seams. It was a cycle. Post World War II, churches were full, most every Sunday. There used to be senior ministers, associate ministers, paid staff, Christian education, Renaissance, big operations, really big operations. Since 1828, I believe it is, senior ministers, not including all the transient associates, I believe the number is 26. So that was interesting. Data from early 2000s showed 22, and then if you go through and add, it's under 30, probably just under 30. Some of the ministers stayed 10, 15 years. Some stayed a few years. I thought that was interesting.
I'm slightly curious about this today. My ancestry goes back quite a ways, and half my family is Protestant. Anyway, I wanted to find out when, back years ago, did families pay for their pews?
Yes. Yeah. You would lease the pew that you wanted to sit in. Yes. That was a real thing. That started back with the $10 shares. And you were limited on how many shares you could buy. I think it was 10 shares, so you could only give $100. It was a limit. But yeah, you got you and your family's house. I don't know when that changed. I've heard of that though from other Protestant churches.
What's unique is if you travel around New England, I used to notice as we entered the town site, there's always a congregational church that looks like this. All of them.
Except some of them became Unitarian in about the early 1800s. There was a controversy between the Unitarians and the Trinitarians. So sometimes you'll go into a town and look and you'll think, oh, it's a congregational church, and it's actually a Unitarian church.
So they're all kind of the same.
Yes, similar.
Similar construction.
Yes.
Old New England
I
construction.
like that.
Is it true that because it's a historic site in East Long Meadow, it will never be torn down?
I'm not sure we
I've
could say
been,
that.
I've been told that.
I don't know if that's true. I think
It's
the
part of
practice
this-
probably.
It's part of the historical society or whatever, so it'll never be torn down, thank goodness.
I'm not so sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it fell into disrepair. You know, the historical registry kind of protects the process you do to keep it up. You're supposed to keep the general curb appeal, general appearance. Of course, you can make changes. You can update your doors and windows, you know, those things that change. And this, our church has been rehabbed so many times. You know, the heating system, but in the last 10, 12 years, all the new heating systems and things modifies what the inside looks like now versus what it used to look like 50 years ago. So this isn't like something you would see at Sturbridge Village, where it's in its original ornate presentation. It's certainly had some changes done to it. I'm not so sure. I know we've been having conversations with the Historical Society, increasingly, as we've got some application. That's a good question.
But in terms of the ownership, I think we have, it belongs to the church.
Oh, that belongs to us. We can do-
The society.
We can do what
So-
we choose.
If there were a sudden disappearance of the membership, it would go to whomever, I mean, it would be some sort of, almost like a will about
Like a bequeath.
what was, yeah, who was gonna be bequeathed to.
It would be just so sad to have it.
Right.
I mean, it makes East Long Meadow Center what it is,
Right.
you know?
I mean, and you've seen, you see that in some other towns. I mean, even in, I think it's Ludlow, is it Ludlow or Chicopee?
Yeah.
There's a congregational church that's up for sale.
Yes.
So, you know,
Yes.
so, you know, we definitely, that's why, you know, talking about the history is important, so that we can make sure everybody, you know, knows how we keep that history alive. And to share through stories, you know, that's why, you know, I was so excited to come today to hear what stories people may remember or have, or, you know, why it's important to us, you know, as a collective society. So we want to capture that, retain it, carry it forward.
You know, like you mentioned, there is a lot of, the town is very aware of most everything that we do, and we do enjoy a lot of town support as far as if we need to do something. It's recognized, like, you know, and that value is recognized by the town, so that's fantastic when you have that support. The rec department leases fellowship halls and children's programs in the summer. They've done a daycare, they've done
Theater.
drama theater thing for children. We've had a couple of dances there, you know, adult dances, which, you know, a lot of stuff, a lot of engaging things.
I've heard stories about East Long Meadow High School having proms at the church as well. Does anybody remember those days?
I remember when East Long Meadow didn't have a high school. You know, we didn't have a high school. Went into classical, or you had choice of 5 high schools. Tech, classical, commerce, trade, or cathedral. And the town would pay you to go to either any one.
It must have been recent, because Ralph Cooley, who lives in town, who has fathers lived in town forever, he graduated, I believe, from classical or commerce. Ralph's probably 85 now or so. So if you look back, you take off the time, it was quite late when they built that high school.
Yeah. It was only eighth grade and that was it, everybody
Went to eighth grade,
went.
then ninth grade at Forest Park Junior High, and then the choice of 5 high schools, which was good. It gave you a lot of variety to pick from. And classical was so hard that you went to college and you had an easy time.
Wow, that's almost like the history of the first kindergarten, right? It was a partnership between the church and the town for a number of years. That's really interesting. I'm gonna make this available to anybody who wants it. I'll send a copy to Alicia. So yeah, as we're still gathering more information, we're gonna refine this, add to it.
Does anybody have other memories that you can share?
I remember when they had a horse farm, so you can't see it here, they tore it down. When people came to church, they'd come by horse. And there was a barn on the side of the
Yes.
street.
Okay,
And my earliest memories of seeing that barn, no horses were in it,
okay,
but it was there, and then they tore it down.
okay.
It's near where the gazebo is.
Oh, and also the building above it, building.
Beverly lived next door.
No, not that, not that
That
area.
building, just
No,
further
I'm
down by
talking
the
about
gazebo.
Prospect Street.
Okay.
Near the bottom of Prospect Street was a horse park. And we didn't have horses in the 30s, but the barn was still there.
Well, we've wondered why the building just south of that on Prospect is, we call it the carriage barn, but the carriage house, but nobody knows why we call it the
I think
carriage house.
people may have come by horse and maybe stayed overnight upstairs or something. Because we forget how close we are to horses.
Yeah.
We're not that far removed from the horse. And people used to come from all over, wait for the cars. And even when they had cars, not everybody had one, and only one to a house. So there was a barn there for a long
And
time.
most of the mothers were home, they didn't work.
Yeah, but I remember when they had a horse barn.
When do you think that might have been?
The
When they took that,
1930s.
they took it down in the 30s maybe?
Maybe.
Okay,
I was very young. And
okay.
they had trolleys going right down Prospect Street.
Yeah, coming from Suffield.
Prospect,
Electric trolleys, were they electric, or they were
they
buses?
were on rails, I don't know what they were on. But I remember when they tore up the tracks of the trolley, I was very sad. And I told my mother, we're going backwards in history. Because the trolley was so exciting. To go right into Springfield, down Sumner Avenue, down that big, what's the name of it, Mount Fort Pleasant Avenue. Right down into Main Street, Springfield, and then we'd come back to East Long Meadow. And I think it went up Prospect, maybe to Chestnut, and then turned around and came back. But I remember taking a ride, and it was a very exciting ride, but a rough ride. You know, we went back and forth and on the seat. It wasn't too comfortable, but it was exciting.
Before Six Flags came.
Yeah, and I thought it was going back in history to take it off.
How much was a ride?
I'm sure it was pennies.
Yeah.
But back then, women didn't have cars, so if they wanted to shop in Springfield, they had to take one of their children along, get on the trolley and go to Springfield,
Interesting.
because that's how they shopped.
I have a picture that I wasn't able to include in
Do you
this.
remember that? The trolley?
On the back side, if you pull into the lower parking lot off Summers Road, where the office people park, right, right there was a white barn there. a picture of that. And that also housed, I don't know, carriages or horses or something. And that would have been on the Summers Road side. There's an actual picture of it still right off that back corner. It's exactly where those first parking spots on the right are.
When did they create the Rotary? Does anybody know that? When did it become?
Well, Bruce Moore has done a bunch of seminar things on, just talking about it, and he said the wide expanse was always there. That was the beginning of the part of the town. I don't remember why they created the Rotary, but the 7 streets were always there. And it's been a topic of conversation ever since.
Interesting, yeah, that's for sure.
I can remember getting baptized. I was a little older, but my 4 years between my brother and I, and he was real little. I remember getting it done, but he was just a baby. But I do remember that happening. That was way back.
There's a lot of old records of these things in some of those boxes. There's some stuff over here you can look through. A lot of it's 60s and 70s, and there's some older things. But, as we go through some of the details over time, add to this, and I know Bruce has reached out
There
to
was
us.
another church, a Methodist church, on the corner of Elm Street, right near the road.
And so that's the Methodist Church that was the second, the second,
For the first,
That was the Baptist.
that was the Baptist Church.
The Methodist Church was
Methodist
right in
Church.
the corner.
Yeah. And it disappeared.
So that's not what went up to the
Yes,
top of the
it is.
hill?
It is.
Well, not the building.
They
No,
built
no,
their own
you didn't go,
church.
but the membership of that building came from the one by the.
Just like the Lutheran church was on.
They tore that old building down. They said,
Was on top Main Street.
Yeah, well, going up the hill there, there was
Summers
a
Road.
Lutheran church, and then they moved over to Elm. And now they're closed. Everything was right near the center.
that makes sense. A lot of the documents that we've come across show, or they state, that our church is the oldest continually used church in town. The First Baptist Church, gotta get some clarity on that, because some folks have said that they go into 1790s. But we, according to the state historic site, our church is the oldest continually used church in town. So, straight from the college.
What part of the church came down the hill to get where it is now? Is there any place when you go in that you're in the original part?
Sanctuary.
The whole sanctuary.
The whole sanctuary.
It is?
Except for the front, not the altar part, but the
The
whole
balcony
box.
too?
I think so.
Yes, I thought so,
They showed with the windows.
right.
See, there's windows here. This is where the altar and the new choir and organ area is now, right?
I remember.
But there's windows. This is an original picture. There's windows, so that was
There.
the outside. It was literally a square. What you see in the sanctuary is the original footprint, except for the back and the altar area.
So at that point, there was not an organ yet in this, so when it moved, it just moved with, is that,
That looks like.
you think it's a kind of organ?
It could be a non-pipe organ.
Yeah, they call it,
Yeah.
that has a different name, you know what we call,
Melodian?
melodeon
Yeah.
type of organ. Yep. And then we get into the pipe organs moving forward. We probably still have the original Can post it. Platform.
Actually, I don't.
But notice the lights.
Yeah.
Chandeliers.
Chandeliers. There's some tall ceilings in there, that's some pretty good engineering, especially back then. And the artwork. I grew up in the Methodist Church up in Maine, and the artwork was amazing. You know, the stained glass windows and all the artwork.
Is that on the wall? I can't see, or is it a pattern of the painting?
Kind of looks like it's on the wall, but it is hard to tell
It
on
does,
the
but
picture.
that's unusual. I haven't seen other cases where it's been painted directly on the wall.
Can you see the arch going
Yeah.
around it though?
Yeah.
I don't think they would put an arch in it, just a picture.
Yeah.
So, Carrie,
Yeah.
why the 3 chairs?
I think that that's just I don't know, could be even reflecting the Trinity kind of idea, but I think it's pretty typical of the way that these churches evolve.
The church I grew up in had 3 chairs.
I did too, and
It's probably reflective of the Trinity.
because we didn't usually use lay people to participate
Right.
back in the day.
Yeah, but you would have also had visiting ministers to do things like ordinations or other things like that, so it's true, you had only one minister.
Frankly, there's no Carrie's the pastor. I should have mentioned that earlier, my apologies.
Good thing it's not 1975.
Well, I know, right? That's, but women were ordained prior to 75.
Oh, yeah, 1869.
So I wonder why did that kind of be the protocols?
Because it was each church's decision, you know? It was not coming down from on high from anybody. It's just each church decided.
Turn some lights on here. Feel free to
Other
peruse
questions?
anybody have any more questions or comments or stories? Or? That's the fun
I
stuff.
got a question. Because I'm assuming when the church was built, Puritan New England was more or less not, I don't know how long Puritan New England.
It was no longer Puritan.
Okay,
It was
all right, that's what I was trying to
Christian.
figure out. Is how many years Puritan New England is considered to have been. And I wondered,
Probably about through the second or third decade of the 1700s. So,
like up
About-
until 1790?
no, before that, probably the 1740s, 50s.
So it was only like 120 years?
Yeah. Although, I mean, definitely we evolved from that, but think what this church was 120 years ago, so just what it is now in terms of
Yeah.
quality and custom.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank you.